Welcome, my friends, to Peace, Love, and Bring It Back, the podcast that never ends, where we gather our clan and talk about the peace and love in our lives, the difficulties along the journey, and how we rise up from them. We will experience a little thing I call Kluberty together, and by the end of the show, we're going to find our sweet spot. I'm Uncle Dave, and our transformation starts right here. Hey now, and how are you doing? Just want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring It Back. Now, today's guest is somebody you just meet along the way, and you know he's a really good guy. I mean, Matthew Brackett, we're going to hear so much about. Not only is he a veteran, he is a pastor. He's just an overall amazing guy, especially when you meet him. And I met him finally a couple of weeks ago live, and I still say live meeting, that handshake is always worth something, no matter who you handshake. It's always a great day. How you doing today, Matt?
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, we're recording this on the 31st of December, so we're getting ready for the new year. But yes, we're doing very well. Thank you. And it's great to be here. Thank you for making time for me, David.
Excellent. Yeah, so we've had a lot of conversations offline, so we'll share some of those conversations now, because I know that there's so many things that you're passionate about. Well, why don't you first tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm the 10th of 13 children from small town New England, small town Massachusetts. And my parents have since passed, so I spent a lot of time visiting my siblings, nephews, and nieces. At the age of 18, I went to seminary. I went off on an adventure, what I call an adventure, leaving small town New England sort of to see the world and to serve the world in the field of Catholic priesthood. So that required 12 years of education and preparation. That brought me not to Connecticut, then to Rome, where I did my philosophy and theology, and then received ordination as a priest in 2002. And then that brought me just to Colombia, to Ireland, to England, to Colombia again, and Chile, Mexico, and then also into as you mentioned, into the Navy as a U.S. as a Navy chaplain in the United States Navy, and working with Marines and with sailors. So that's, in just a few seconds, that's a little bit about my journey of 30 years in that world. And I stepped away from formal ministry in 2021. And I'm finishing a degree in the psychology of leadership. And I've started to practice coaching and education practice to help people in their personal development and their development of their leadership of themselves and of others, amongst many other things that, as you said, I'm passionate about.
Yeah, no, and the part, I'm sure it's an interesting blend between leadership and then also faith and spirituality. And that's what we talk about here is a spiritual side. Doesn't necessarily have to be defined as a religion, but you need to have that fine balance. So how do you find a balance like that? What does peace and love mean to you?
That's a big question. Let me backtrack for a second. What you just talked about, there's a trend nowadays where people talk about, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. I firmly, just from an anthropological perspective, I firmly believe that the human person is religious, but doesn't mean that they're linked to a specific religion. But we tend towards the transcendent, towards something above us, something that's eternal, right? Bigger than us. We'll call it our the divine, the universe, our greater power, our higher power, as some people call it. So yeah, so I like to term it like that because of institutional religion and the bad experiences people have had, so they sort of grab onto that I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. But in my view, yes, I see those words almost meaning the same thing, that because it talks about that I aspire to and I lean into, I tend towards something that's beyond me. Right? And I think that speaks a lot about the human heart. Now, taking that back now to what you just asked me about peace and love and how do I integrate, I suppose, the spiritual with the human. And again, with that, I think, as you said, the spiritual, it's part of who we are as human beings, or that aspect of us. So I think in your podcast, you're also encouraging people to pay attention to that and to integrate that into their lives, right? So peace and love, I've always said that those are big words and I don't use them lightly. And I'm sure you don't use them lightly. Nowadays, especially love. We use love for everything, right? In other languages, and even if you go back to the Greek and even in Spanish, another language, in Italian, which are languages that I speak, there's different levels of different words that they use for like the levels of love. But in English, we sort of use it for everything, and sometimes it can lose its power and its meaning. So peace, when we look at peace, I think it comes from living with this internal alignment, right, of my values and with myself. So not living in conflict with ourselves or in contradiction. Now, as human beings, there's always a little bit of conflict and contradiction that we can experience. But it's that striving to do that, to live that alignment, to in alignment with what some people would call our conscience, right? Sort of like this guiding light in our life that keeps us on track to do what we would consider good and to avoid what we would consider unhealthy or bad. So like conscience, like that internal compass. So I think when I live principles, my values, and my beliefs, when I live a life that invites peace into my life. Peace also comes from relationship with others. I think, friends and family, and where there's harmony, communication, where there's trust. So I think using that, where there's harmony, healthy communication and trust with oneself, peace can come from that, and also in our relationship with the world outside of us. And I also see that peace comes from my relationship with what we were talking about, the transcendent, that higher power, God, the eternal, the infinite.
But it all has to start with us, right? All of this is, if there's peace within ourselves, we can start believing, because when there's not peace, even with the transcendent, if there's not peace within ourselves, we're blaming. We put, a different type of play into it versus when there's peace within ourselves, we can see it within others, and we can feel it within whatever beliefs you have.
Yes. Yes, and you're right. And I think when people are in conflict with themselves, when there's either conflict or anger or whatever it is inside of them, they also can bring that to their relationships. And I think the peace, it's a gift as well. It's a gift that we receive from others, but it's also a gift that we can give to others in the way we look at them, in the way we value them, in the way we approach them, the way we speak to them. Yes, I think peace comes also with understanding. Peace comes with compassion. Peace comes with mercy. And if we were used, something from biblical tradition, there's this common phrase that comes up: "Peace be with you." It's almost like peace is something that we can wish and give to others.
Yep.
So thank you for that. It's such a great topic. And then you also mentioned love, which is another big word. Right, in which something that we can devalue it because of, we love activities, we love events, we love food, we love animals, we love people, right? And I would say that there's an emotional side to love because we can experience love in our emotions, but there's also, I think love is a decision. And that's sometimes where we can struggle as human beings, where we can struggle because sometimes we're not feeling it. Right, and then people can equate that to, well, I can no longer love because I'm not feeling it. So love, that's why the word in English is not good, because there's much more to it. There is an emotional side, but the emotional side doesn't always accompany what love is. But there's a side that has to do with our will, with our decision. So I think love is dedication. Love is commitment. Love is a meaningful connection, which has meaning in and of itself, with no other interest, right? Love is not self-interested. Love looks for the good of the other, right? And that's why there's not always a sense of emotion, right? Look at a parent who loves their child; they're not always feeling great about it, right? When the child wakes them up in the middle of the night and things like that, the emotion. But the parents there, and they're loving, they're giving, they're committed, they're so interested, right? And love that's why I like to say love, sacrifice is the language of love.
Yes.
Now let me go on a tangent here, because sacrifice it has this negative connotation for us. The sacrifices, but we also know that sacrifice brings so much meaning to everything. If we go to the Latin, the word sacro facere, right? To make something sacred, make something holy, to make something important. So when something is important to you, let's go back to the image of the child. When a child is important to me, I will do anything to love that child, right? And those are the steps that we take to make something important or someone important. That's what we call sacrifice. So I see sacrifice as a very positive thing. And we all see it that if you want to grow, well, you have to feel some pain, right? And we could also put the word sacrifice in there, because when we have a goal, when we're aiming for something, sacrifices are like the rungs of the ladder that we have to climb to reach that goal. And I would say the same thing about love.
That's awesome.
And love is, thank you. What love, and something else that comes to me is love is, it's about being wholly present to someone, embracing them, and empowering them. And I link love to leadership so much and this is in relationships, to lead with love, in our family as parents, and in the workplace. Leadership is love. There's a big movement of that in the leadership space about that leadership is love and bringing love to leadership. So that's I don't know. Hopefully, I didn't go on too long, but
that was fine. There were so many gems in there. I mean, that's why I just let you run. Really, it was talking about sacrifice, and I've mentioned often that we use the word love too quickly. For me, love is that unconditional love with even an animal. It's having that you care more about that other individual, that it's not love. Oh, I love pizza. Yeah, you might like pizza, and there's a difference, and we need to protect those words. And I really enjoyed. I didn't want to say love, but I really enjoyed your explanation, because those were really some pretty deep conversations, and I hope people listen to this more than once, because it really does get to the root, the foundation of what you do. And so how do you bring it? You just mentioned how you bring both of those pieces into your leadership programs. How do you do that? How does that blend work through?
Well, I can say that I love the human person. I'm very passionate about the human person. And so some people will be resistant to bringing the word love into leadership. But I think it's one of the greatest things that a human being can do. And it's also one of the things that all human beings yearn for. We want to be seen, valued, appreciated, and essentially loved. Now, I'm not talking about a romantic or emotional type of love in the workplace, but when we think of love as also being seen, valued, appreciated, and other things like that, that's how we love others. Then leaders are called to love their people, because leadership is service, how we serve others. And again, like I said, we don't have to be emotionally or romantically in love with the people that we serve, but we care about them. And we put their well-being first. Whether it be in public service, the good of our country, all of our citizens, whether it be in an organization, whether it be in a family, to lead with love. And again, it's easy to say. It's very challenging to do, because human beings can be difficult.
Well, that's it. We sometimes get tripped up on the human experience than we do on what our feelings are, or we communicate it improperly. I know I've been guilty of that. I know what my perspectives are, and I just had a conversation like that with a friend of mine. From our perspective, we're always working at our highest good. That doesn't mean that we are. It doesn't mean that it's received that way. But when we do that, that's why there's so many disagreements. If I do something or say something to you, and you might not receive it, or it's not communicated in the proper way, you might take offense to it. You might be like, "Oh, you just said this," and it's not meant in the way that it was communicated, or I could have communicated it better. So it's also that important part of leadership is also how we communicate.
It is. And that's very complex, whether
Yes.
it be in relationships and also in the workplace, is because again, we interpret things oftentimes through our filters of our own experiences. And we can also draw conclusions, we can make assumptions, and we oftentimes don't clarify maybe what was the intent behind what was being said.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, communication is key, and it continues to be a huge challenge for us as human beings.
So challenges. I know we spoke off, and though you've been a pastor, and you're a fan of sin. So let's and not in a bad sense, but what do you? Let's explain that. How you're a fan of sin and what that means to you.
Right. I remember I said that once from the pulpit, and actually it's one of those, sometimes you try to say things in public speaking that gets people attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh, now they're listening, and now I can really get the message across of what I'm saying. And so people that really caught them, and they would go back over that because sin, first of all, let me say that sin is, in the root word, it refers to missing the mark. In other words, we were aiming for something, but we missed it. The important thing is that we were aiming for something. But the other important thing is, why didn't I missed it and I went for something else which didn't satisfy the need that I was looking, or it hurt someone, in other words, it was a bit diverted. And so to understand the harm that did, and to understand what was I looking for, and how can I satisfy what I was looking for in a healthier way. Now, what also sin, and we can use other words for that, right? Sin, difficulties or challenges or our weaknesses, or we could call it, right? Whatever word we want to put in there to get that sense across. It keeps us grounded. And another word for that is humble. Because humble also comes from a word in Latin, right, meaning sort of the ground, right? That it keeps us grounded. And humility it's about, we're big now, and we've always been, but nowadays, living in the truth. That's what humility is, living in the truth of who I am, of where I'm at, and in the truth of my relationship with others. So what our difficulties do, right? And when we miss the mark, what that does to us, when we face it properly, of course, it brings us, I would say, in the Christian sense, to our knees. It reminds us who we are, that we can continue to grow, but it also makes us look at, right, what was I trying to satisfy in my heart in doing what I did, and which ended up backfiring. Right? Either backfiring on someone else or backfiring on myself. And so there's so much we can learn from it. And the fact is, whether we use a sin or any other word, the fact is that it's part of who we are as human beings. So if I know there's this contradiction that we live in, also in this culture, is where we have all these high standards and high ideals that we're all supposed to be perfect, but the reality is that we're not. And so we live pretty frustrated, disappointed, and discouraged. Right? And then we live surprised that people make mistakes. And we use the word scandal, and it's all these big words that the media uses around people making mistakes. It's part of who we are as human beings. Now, the important thing, and when we sin, when we make mistakes, the big mistake is when we are proud and arrogant, and when we are blinded. When we are blinded to our condition, to our weaknesses, to our mistakes. That's why being able to see it, there's so many lessons that we can learn from it, that it makes us humble, keeps us grounded, and then it leads us to ask for forgiveness, whether that be from our higher power, whether that be from someone else, or whether that be just from myself, to learn to have grace and forgiveness with one. So such a deep process that comes from missing the mark and making a mistake. But we have to aim and shoot and able to miss the mark, right? So this is very much about being proactive. Yes, make mistakes, but be proactive also in the process of learning from them, growing through them.
That's
and
the most important part. Yeah.
And in that, we always look for grace and compassion from other people. And I would encourage all of our listeners to to give the same grace and compassion and forgiveness and understanding that we want, to give that to others.
We'll be back in a moment.
Hi there, I'm Lainey.
And I'm Estella. And we're interrupting this podcast because we have a question for this audience.
Do you or someone you know live with a disability or a chronic condition?
If yes, you're not alone. 1 in 5 people in the U.S. do.
We're the hosts of the Embrace It podcast, where we share tips, tools, and inspiration for everyday living with all types of disabilities.
Our interviews with badass disability advocates will boost your confidence in all areas of life, including travel, fashion, relationships, career, and more.
So walk or roll on over to your favorite podcast player and subscribe to Embrace It with Lainey and Estella.
And now back to the show you were listening to. Another great show produced by Launchpad 516 Studios.
You're listening to Peace, Love, and Bring It Back with me, Uncle Dave Shemetsky. That's always the tough part, right? We want the grace. We want to receive the grace when we make a mistake, but do we give that same grace to others? And I just had a conversation, not using the word grace, but with one of my daughters, and saying, would you want somebody else to treat you the way that you just treated somebody else? And then you have to think about it, and it's more than just being graceful and forgiving, but it's really trying to see that other person's point of view, and that, because from their perspective, it's accurate. That doesn't mean that their responses were right, but from their point of view, you can't change somebody's story. You could say, to not minimize their story, you could say, this is how you felt, and I understand that and respect that, but this is where I was coming at, and if you could understand some of my story, that would help us both communicate better, because that's really part of the biggest challenge, is the communication part. Right. We understand when we don't hit the mark, when we sin or we make a mistake. It doesn't have to go, because that word sin is like, oh my God, we think about it as so high a level of doing something wrong or not making that bar, that imaginary bar, right? Because from the pulpit or wherever, sin is bad, right? The 7 deadly sins and all those pieces. But it really is more about, what do we learn from when I've made a mistake? And that's why, in a religious sense, most of us believe that God is forgiving. And, when we've sinned, even, the unnamed sins, there still is a repentance that's able to do that. You're able to lift yourself and have that resilience within it. How do you find some resilience within yourself when you've not necessarily created the bar, made the bar that you make? How do you build upon that?
The resilience, I suppose I learn as I go. As many people say, life is messy. Another phrase I like is live my way to the answers, but I also just fumble my way to the answers. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, now, when I've been through a lot of difficult periods in life, a lot of darkness and challenges, and I hated my life, and when I felt like I was at a dead end, and it was like just my future shattered, and I never saw that as being strong, but as I look back, and also just hearing other people where they affirm that, the thing that you have so much courage, you have so much strength. When we go through those moments, we don't feel strong.
Right.
But when we look back, we say, holy smokes, well, look what I was able to walk through. Right. For years in my life, I felt like I was walking through quicksand. But what was important is I just had to continue to take one step, and I focused on just taking one step after another. Right. And trying to remember and living with hope. That beyond that dead end, if it was sort of a brick wall or whatever, that there is life, there's hope, there's future, there's beauty. And part of life is taking away each brick at a time and beginning to peer through and to see that. So there's so much worth living for. So I think the big picture in life has always given me strength to continue. Why am I doing what am I doing? What I'm doing, right? The whole thing around purpose, the whole thing around meaning, is where we get motivation. I always say that they'll call them our M&Ms, meaning and motivation, right? Meaning, as human beings, motivation links onto meaning, right? And the motivation in the human being, it needs to attach onto something. And that's what we call meaning. And when that meaning and purpose isn't there, of course we don't feel motivated. So the problem isn't motivation, which is where sometimes people go, hey, get yourself motivated. It's not about, it's about meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
That will then bring up that fire, that flame of motivation.
Yeah, meaning is so important in so much what we do. You know, when you can't get motivated, you have to attack. I love that you mentioned that, because that's really what it is. It's the same thing with arguments. It's what is the meaning for you, and you know, and that's really what it comes down to. If the meaning is more for somebody else, that's when I talk about that recalibration. When I work with people, is we sometimes have to recalibrate. What is your meaning? You know, my meaning could be 0, and for your meaning, it could be 7. So, you know, if it's important enough for you and I'm not realizing the importance, that's where we need to recalibrate and figure out, why is it not important to me? Or can we, you know, reduce what you might be thinking about, and, you know, in a way that's both comfortable and safe for both of us.
Yes. Everyone runs on a sort of different type of gasoline, right? And it's identifying that.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we want to put the gasoline that runs us into the tanks of others, and it doesn't do it. Right. So we have, and it's about working with people to understand what is their meaning and purpose, what gives them the flame.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I love the phoenix metaphor, and I know you said you've risen out of there. And do you have a favorite R word? Because we haven't done this in a while. You know, I always talk about where you would talk about humbling and where you need to ground yourself. So I often talk about that there's an R in your heart, and because we ground ourselves, the letters of earth and heart are the same letters, just rearranged differently. And,
right.
And what could we do to find the R in our heart, the words in our heart that bring us joy or, you know, some sort of power?
Yes, and we've talked about resilience as one. Another R word, which I love, and it has a lot to do with my own personal experience in faith and just in life, is the word resurrection. And again, very linked also to the phoenix, but it's not, there's two angles to look at this, just as a word, right, as a concept of resurrection or rising. Mm-hmm. But if I want to allow me to talk about it a little bit from the faith perspective, because I think whether you believe in Jesus or in the Bible or not, there's still a great message here. Mm-hmm. Is the way Jesus, you know, when he went through what we would call his passion, right, when he was condemned to death and scourged and crowned with thorns, had to carry his cross. And whether you believe in that, there's so many images there. Is that Jesus responded to where there was hatred. He responded with love. When there was violence all around him, he responded with peace. Right? He didn't retaliate. And when there was death, he responded with life, which is what resurrection is about. And I think for all of us to be people of resurrection. In other words, when negativity comes towards us, we transform it into resurrection, into life, because in the end, that's what we're called. We're called not only to live, but to give life to others. To give life to others through our words, through our thoughts, through the way we treat others. It's such a powerful and beautiful thing, because that's what human beings can do. That's the power of being human. As we go back to the power to love, yep, and the power to give life. So resurrection. I suppose in my own life, there's been those resurrection moments, and I think this really understanding the resurrection of Jesus, I think it happened in the context of when I was going through just a lot of difficulties, and it was a very impactful moment to see Jesus teaching us how to respond to hatred, to violence, to death. Right, and yes.
You know, that's so powerful. I'm listening to it and never heard it broken out that way. And I'm like, wow, you know, really, I've joked with some friends, or even spoken about that. The ultimate Phoenix moment is Jesus. If you believe it, if you follow it, and people have always asked me, because I come from a Jewish faith, do you believe in Jesus? I go 100%. I go. In fact, when I was being married to my children's mom, we went through pre-Cana, and the priest had asked me, what do you believe if we were going to raise the girls Catholic? And I go, it's one God. I go, I believe in Jesus. Now, did he be resurrected? That's a different conversation. I don't know. I wasn't there, right? But I go, I believe everything that he was saying, he was preaching, and that's what we have to learn. And we don't have to, but it's helpful for all of us when we learn that. But I had never heard of the resurrection like that, where you brought in actually peace and love in so many ways, and how many experiences we've all had that those passions of love and really has leveled us up, has resurrected each one of us, has risen us out of the ashes of our own lives. So I love that. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you, David. And it has very much to do with what we talked about before with sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about rising up from that and not getting stuck in that. And so to live as resurrected people and as witnesses to resurrection. And I mean that, and nothing that has to do with faith, but it has to do with just with the human experience, and to bring resurrection, to bring life to other people, to all the people that we come across.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. That's why I really enjoy doing the podcast. You never know where you're going to hear something that really hits you home. And there's always something out of every episode that I've had. And this was, you've given us a lot of gems during this episode that are just like, I'm going to have to listen. I got to listen to that again. I mean, if you see me moving on the video, I'm like taking little notes, and I'm like, I got to listen to that again. Wow, this is so powerful. I'd like to explain, so how did this journey, this path that you've been on, so you went to ministry and then went to the Navy. How'd that combine those two?
For me, it was a very easy, it was sort of a seamless transition. People, the civilian wouldn't see it as such, but the organization that I was part of in the Catholic Church had a very militant side to it, right? With very disciplined, good order and discipline as the military. There was a lot of that, right? But why did I do it? I suppose it had a lot to do with what I was going through my personal life, that I needed or I wanted a different space to do ministry in. A Catholic priest ministers oftentimes, most times, to the Catholic population. And I wanted to serve beyond that. I wanted to serve people beyond that, because it's true. I mean, there's so much, it's not downplaying what priests do, but there's so many people beyond the pews. There's so many people beyond the walls of the church. And I wanted to meet people where they're at. And this is so important for any faith group now.
Yeah.
It's so important. People aren't going to the physical building of a church, but to meet people where they're at and to walk with them. So I saw military chaplaincy as an opportunity of a great diverse ministry. Because as a chaplain, I was on a base, 4,000, 5,000 people, and I was chaplain to everyone. No matter whatever type of background, I was there to love them and care for them in their totality, not only as Marines and sailors, but in their just totality as human beings. And as a chaplain, you help the commanders. I offer that perspective to help the commanders do that they're leading them as Marines and sailors, but more importantly, also as human beings, and sort of take in, so I was the promoter and defender of the human element. Right? That's what a chaplain does. So I did it because for that, and I was on this discernment process of trying to figure out if I wanted to continue, if I was meant to continue in priestly ministry. And so I wanted a different space to be able to do it, to continue that journey of figuring it out if this was the right fit for me.
That's interesting. And you never know where the journey comes, and it was really great that you wanted to expand. And it really is. We don't necessarily always go. Most churches have their online forums because of the pandemic, and membership is down across the board. It doesn't matter what religion, and it's nice to have this message, and that's what's probably further taking you on this leadership piece, because it's the same leadership from the stories that you've done, the education that you've brought in to where you're at now.
It is. It's about helping people, continue to serve people just from a different perspective. Right? So a lot of services I offer are non-faith-based, but if they want it to be faith-based, then that's also part of the value that I can bring to people. And then there's this dual element of how we lead ourselves, and then how we lead others. And I think just integrating that is so important, right? The personal, where the personal and professional intersect, is really sort of the space where I like to work with people, because the totality of the human person, dealing with us in our totality, is so important, and not compartmentalizing things, and not just worrying about the professional space, but bring in the whole person. And I believe that when we lead ourselves better, well, we're going to show up better. Right? Going back to what you talked about, peace, right? The peace, the alignment. That when we achieve that in our lives, for those people who are in leadership roles, they're gonna show up with better energy. They're gonna be more effective. They're gonna make better decisions. They're gonna treat their people better. The performance is gonna be better. The results, it's all benefits, but it's challenging to do. Right? It's challenging for us to look at ourselves, right? And to ask for support, and because it's just hard for us to do for whatever reason, how we're made as human beings.
Well, it's scary to do that. That was a part of a process that I created called Clubrity, and it's looking at that hard. How did I get here? Right? When we look from our own perspectives, I'm a good person. I do this. I made mistakes, but why can't people forgive me? All these things. But then we have to look at ourselves. Well, why did we make the mistake, and things like that? And that's usually where people get scared. To that hard look. And sometimes we had to unlearn things. What are some things that you might have had to unlearn?
Some things that I had to unlearn. I suppose with the process that I went through, well, going to what you said right now, is I had a great inability to look at myself, because my whole ministry and service was about other people. Right? And so when the kitchen sink was thrown at me, right, just of challenges and difficulty, I was unable, and I didn't know what to do. And I suppose that's why I get so passionate about it and excited about this topic, is because I lived it, and I knew I see now how blind I was. Yep. I was doing my best, but I didn't have those muscles, those abilities. I hadn't developed them. And I don't say that with great pride. And a lot of it had to do with just my formation, educational process. I think I could have been served better in that regard, of preparing me for life. But from an early age, in seminary and all, I was put into leadership roles. So it was always about the other person, and I didn't have a great ability to sort of self-reflect and self-awareness. And that did not serve me well. So I came to, I suppose, going back to your question, I had to unlearn the fact that I, as a priest, that I had to have it all together. Right? And this touches on a lot of things that we've already talked about. So realize, no, I don't have to have it all together, and I don't have it all together, and it's important to deal with it. I've tried to brush it under the carpet for a long time, and the pile gets pretty big, and it's no longer invisible. There's also, as I say, sometimes there's things that we put in the closet hoping that they'll disappear, but when they're in darkness, they grow, or they go bad. And they begin to stench. There's a stench, and so we just can't get away from it. So you have to deal with it at some point. So part of that is that learning to do that. And I think my own process as well, my faith journey, is relearning how I relate to God, to the divine. And I suppose I've discovered a God who walks with me, who loves me, who cares for me, who has my best interests in mind. A God who understands my decisions and who is supportive. It's not a God of it's this way or there's no way, right?
Yeah, right.
Right? God wants what's best for us. If we're going to talk about God or this higher power, what word you ever want to use, but God wants what's best for us. And he gives us intelligence. He gives us our will, and he gives us our conscience to be able to do the best we can. And like a parent, he's with us. God is with us in our mistakes, when we trip and fall and scrape our knees or when we hurt ourselves. And God is with us when we do really well.
Right. And we have to realize, not have to. I use, but that's where that sin piece. God will forgive us. Because he, she, the universe, the energy knows what's in your heart. And that's why starting cleaning out your own heart is really one of the most powerful pieces in my, not to start going into the religious and the metaphysical, but it really is. It all starts within ourselves. And once we start within ourselves, that's where we can start leading in our communities, in our homes, in our communities. And then, really the world is our oyster as you've traveled the world to, preach and teach different types of leadership.
Yes. The other thing, David, you let me know when we need to finish.
Yeah.
Because as you can see, we could go on forever.
Yeah, I'm watching the time. We'll cut this
right. The other thing is I suppose my view of institutionalized religion has adapted or shifted over time. In any I think there's a beauty and there's a goodness in it. As human beings, organizations and coming together as community is very important. Right. And so there's this sort of like institutionalized stuff can give us direction and guidance. But at the same time, the faith element, people who work in the space of faith have so much power over others. And it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous when it's not used responsibly and with a sense of sacredness. Now, it's also very powerful when it's used in the proper way, right? But, leadership in itself, having authority over people is already a big deal, right? It's important. But when you have authority over people in the religious and spiritual sphere, it's something to tread very carefully. I think, sadly, that's why I think there's a lot of rejection towards institutionalized religion, because people who lead in this space oftentimes don't have the preparation or the awareness or the conscientiousness about the sacred ground that they're walking on. I don't mean just faith, but the sacred ground of people's lives, people's consciences, people's relationship with the divine. And it's often wielded carelessly.
Yeah, no, we can go on another tangent about that, and since we are, earlier this morning, that's where some of the Catholicism really brings in. With the passing of Pope Benedict earlier this morning, you take how much courage that he took to step away when he knew he wasn't meeting it, and then with Pope Francis taking that to a new level where, admitting all of our mistakes and saying God will still love us. And I'm not trying to go into this whole religious piece of that. It's just interesting how if we allow ourselves to morph and to the times and not be so quickly to point out or cancel, certain things that we might have done in the past. I get the mistakes. Sometimes you don't want to forgive and you can hold on to that. But at the end of the day, it's so much easier to forgive and put peace into it than to build up those walls and make sure the cracks in the walls don't come down.
Yes. I think in organizations, there's we all cling to security and safety, right? And that's why we have a difficulty with change. Right? And we see that in a lot of religious organizations, but all I work in the military, it's the same thing. In a lot of organizations have a hard time with change.
Sure.
Right? And because we find security and safety, and that this is how but as you said, morphing, changing, evolving. It's
that adapting that allows us to grow so much better. While we might as human beings be afraid of change, we really are very adaptive beings. But it's how you change. If I just walked over and said to you, walked into your house and said, Matthew, take that shirt off and put on another shirt, that probably wouldn't, or you doing the opposite to me, that probably wouldn't feel so comfortable. But if I said, hey, I think we're going out to play ball, you might be like, oh, okay, let me change my shirt. I don't need a collared shirt to play ball. And,
Right.
And I think that's really where it comes down to, is how we adapt to change, how we learn through those changes, and how we grow through those changes. I know the biggest resurrections in my life, the Phoenix moments, have taught me so much about myself because I've looked for it. I haven't been afraid to look in the mirror and see, rather than put the finger outwards, I like to put the finger inwards to see what it does and how I can find peace in every situation. Now, we've had so many great conversations, and I know we could have so many more, but I wanted to just wrap up the episode. Is there any final gems or what I call, let's walk into our magic garden, is there any seeds you'd like to plant and, share with, just leave some other bits of knowledge? Because like I said, I'm going to be listening to this episode a couple of times.
I think we've talked about a lot, so I wouldn't have any final seeds.
Okay.
I've thrown a lot of seeds at your audience today. And I would encourage them as, first, the responsibility is on me to continue to strive to live what we've talked about.
Sure.
And I would encourage your audience to continue to do the same. If anything that's resonated, continue to reflect on it, look at it, and maybe talk to someone in confidence about it, what that means, and let's make 2023, let's make it different by doing things, even just one thing, doing it differently, doing it better.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And I really appreciate the conversations, and I look forward to more conversations and more gatherings where we're together and we're able to sit and have these conversations.
Thank you, David. Always count me in. If people are looking for me, there's my website, although it's not up, but BrackettAlliance.com, on LinkedIn at Matthew Brackett, and on Instagram, also Matthew Brackett Alliance. And I look forward to having more conversations, David. I've very much enjoyed this. Thank you for making time and space for me.
You're welcome, and I always like to make space for people like yourself, and it's been an honor. Again, I've met so many great people this year, and it's really been really in-depth, fulfilling conversations, and I thank you for that. So, and for everybody else, as we're beginning the new year, because this episode will come out during the new year, I just hope you have the best of years, wishing you health and happiness and plenty of joy, and of course, peace and love. And when you bring the bat, I want you to find your sweet spot. Make sure that you knock it out of the park, and God bless you all. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you're enjoying our show. Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat is brought to you by Launchpad 516 Studios. Executive produced by David Chemetsky and George Andriopoulos. Music selections by James Grant, Zach Nelson, and James Gaither, and licensed through Storyblock. Sound effects and sponsorship music licensed through Epidemic Sound. Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat is hosted with Podbean. Subscribe to our show wherever podcasts are available. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and share with all of your friends. Follow us on Facebook at Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Follow me, Uncle Dave Chemetsky, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Clubhouse. You can find all those links and more info at davidchemetsky.com. For show ideas, feedback, guest inquiries, or just a chat, reach out to me at peacelovebringabat@gmail.com. For sponsorship and media inquiries, reach out to peacelovebringabat@lp516.com. Make sure to follow all the great podcasts produced by Launchpad 516 Studios. Today's journey has come to a close, my friend. I hope the seeds of peace and love continue to grow for each one of you. Remember that peace and love surrounds you and will assist you to rise again. But don't forget to bring it back for what you believe in. Namaste.